highway here between us and the lake. The space program in Canada was just getting going right about the same time. And our first satellite was Alouette 1. And we were third after the Soviet Union and the United States. This was a research satellite. And what's cool about it is it had one invention on the side, something really simple, this sounding antenna. They were trying to figure out how do you deploy an antenna in space. And they realized it's just a long metal thing. If they reel it up like a fishing reel, but then as you unreel it, if you run it through a roller, like sticking out your tongue and rolling your tongue, then you can just keep feeding metal, and this antenna will just get longer and longer and longer. And without gravity, you can stick it basically as long as you want. And so they were deploying antennas 30 meters or 20 meters out from this antenna. This group of guys at de Havilland called themselves Special Projects and Applied Research, which became SPAR. And when Canada was invited to work on the space shuttle, SPAR got that contract. So about the time of Expo 67 and the work that came after that with what your company built, meanwhile, in the space business, we were starting to build Canadarm. And Canadarm flew 100 times on the space shuttle. It released the Hubble telescope. It taught the whole world about space robotics. It revolutionized what robots can do in space. And because of that, we got the invitation to build the huge robot arm that's up on the space station right now. So while you were tackling Terminal 1 here at the airport and the immensity and complexity of that project, we were trying to build a robot arm for the space station. And this is a complicated thing. It has 7 joints. It has a hand on each end. It can grab the station and grab somewhere else and walk itself around the whole space station. And the technology in it, the computer software that's in it is so advanced that in fact it's used in a bunch of different places since. In the hospital in Calgary at Foothills, there's this 2-armed robot called NeuroArm that in fact does brain surgery. And the surgeon sits in a different room with a hand controller, and the patient and the robot is inside an MRI machine. So the surgeon gets a full 3-dimensional representation of what's going on inside the person's skull, as they've done it countless times, removing brain tumors with nanometric precision because of an invention that started back with one person's good idea back in the early 60s. And it's not just a history of invention and of technological achievement and of financial benefit for the country, but it's so endemic that it becomes identifiable as one of our touchstones of Canadian pride, so much so that we put it on our most common bill, on the $5 bill. It's just a great example of holding up people with an objective. Give people a long-term, complex objective, and they will rise to the occasion. Give them the enabling financing, the enabling training, and it's amazing what they will come up with, and the impacts far exceed what your original intent ever was. Been around the world, another wonderful look at what the lakes look like, and time to come home. Get back into Soyuz. These 2 pieces melt in the atmosphere. They burn up. And the only part that's tough enough to survive plummeting into the atmosphere is this little thing about the size of a smart car, with the 3 of us jammed in next to us with our knees up to our chest, with our backs on the floor as it comes blundering down into the atmosphere. And we don't have engines to slow down. We just use friction. So we are basically like a meteorite falling into the atmosphere. It gets to 3,000 degrees Celsius on the outside. So you come burning in, and it's a rugged ride. It shakes you like crazy. Huge forces, about 5 times the force of gravity, squishing you. After being weightless, it's rude coming home. And then the little drag chute opens, and it shakes you around just ridiculously. And then the huge parachute opens, hopefully, and then just before you hit the ground, there's these retro rockets fire that turn what would be a horrible car crash into a survivable car crash. The Russians call them soft landing rockets. This is what the soft landing rockets look like.
And you can see one of those search and recovery helicopters. Once again, that helicopter, part of a dozen such Russian Mi-8 helicopters. Touchdown.
Soft landing rockets. And it's the prairies. It's Baikonur, Kazakhstan. So it's always windy. So you don't just go thunk, but you're going 20 miles an hour sideways. So your spaceship comes down and goes bang, and then goes end over end over end over end after you hit the world, until it rolls to a stop and looks like this. And that's the spaceship that I rode home in. They only use it once. And the Russians, I just love Russians. I lived in Russia for many years. Great people. As soon as you get past the harsh exterior, loving, prideful, immensely practical, well-trained people, but kind of brutal in their practicality. The Russian, straightforward. No sissies in Russia. It's amazing. And so they open up the hatch and they reach in, they say, hey, Privyet, and they grab you and they drag you out like a sack of sugar or something, and they plunk you down in a deck chair that they've set up on the stubble of the field, like they went to Kazakh Tire and bought some deck chairs, and they plunk you down in your chair, and then they hand you an apple. And now you're like sitting in a deck chair holding an apple going, what the heck just happened? And you just feel terrible. I mean, your body feels awful. You can't lift the blood up to your head. All sorts of things are wrong, and it's noisy, and you're just dizzy as can be. All you want to do is just throw up and lie down. But there's a lot of people around, and there's cameras on you. And besides, you're Canadian, so you stick your thumb up and you say, I feel great. And then you go throw up later. And that's what it's like to fly in space. And some of the ways that we have invented and worked on in order to make it successful, to do something as challenging and complex as spaceflight. I have about 10 minutes or so. If anybody has a question, just stick your hand up, and I will happily repeat the question and do my very best to try and answer. Go ahead.
Pictures, you all had watches on. So what time is it in space?
On one of the pictures we had watches on. This is the watch that I wore. It has two